Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the virtual launch of the Fairwork Philippines report. We will start the program in a few minutes, so just a few reminders while participants are coming in our webinar. So please be reminded that this webinar will be recorded, and we encourage everyone to observe proper webinar etiquette. We also request everyone's opinions be respected in this space. Your questions will be answered at the end of the session, so please feel free to use the Q&A feature of this Zoom webinar, and our community managers will be handing out the questions later on. So maaari po tayong maghayag na ating tanong o komento sa Filipino o sa Ingles. So we look forward to everyone's comments and questions in this webinar. Thank you again. A warm welcome to everyone who is joining us today. My name is Chana Garcia. I am part of the Fairwork Philippines team and the co-author of the report. So today we are launching the 2022 Fairwork scores for the Philippines, establishing a baseline on the country's platform economy that will be updated on a yearly basis. The Fairwork project is an action research project that sheds light on the working conditions in the gig economy. We encourage everyone to share their thoughts in the comment sections or via social media posts. So feel free to use our hashtag FairworkPH22 in your posts. The Fairwork Philippines team first wants to acknowledge our global Fairwork partners and the key facilitators from the University of Oxford, as well as De La Salle University Social Development Research Center for their administrative support for Fairwork Philippines, and the Strategic Communications Office of DLSU for helping us organize today's launch. The Philippines team for Year 1 ratings is composed of Professor Cheryl Soriano of De La Salle University, Professor Virgil Binghay of the University of the Philippines, Dr. Pamela Custodio of the University of the Philippines Los Baños, myself, Chana Garcia from DLSU, Marge Benina of DLSU, and Dr. Mark Graham and Dr. Funda Ustek Spilda of the University of Oxford. To introduce Fairwork and its methodology, may we please welcome Dr. Adam Badger from the Fairwork UK team.
Hi, everyone. Chana, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And hi, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us. Yeah, so my name's Adam Badger, and I'm a postdoc researcher at the Fairwork Project, and I'm based in that Oxford team in the UK. What I'm going to do is just give you a bit more information on Fairwork more broadly before we hear really about the amazing work that's been done in the Philippines by this team, which has been launched alongside the report later on. But yeah, so Fairwork is an international research project based at the University of Oxford in the UK and the Beidsieberg Berlin Social Science Centre in Germany, as well as research institutes and universities in many countries across the world. Today is particularly exciting because we're here to present the first round of results for Fairwork for the Philippines. On this first year, the Philippines team evaluated 9 platforms, and that includes ride hail, delivery work, courier work, and logistics services against the 5 principles of fair work that we'll have a look at in a minute. What that gives us is a score out of 10 based on the quality of work they provide for each platform. So I'm going to briefly give a little bit of background about the Fair Work project before the rest of the team presents you the research that's been done over the last year. If we could go to the next slide, we should have a slide that's on housekeeping, hopefully. But yeah, I can't see if the slides are up at the minute. If not, I can talk us through it. It's all good. But yeah, just to say that the event is being recorded. So please observe normal webinar etiquette and that the recording will be available after the event. We do request that everyone's opinions and perspectives are respected in the space, and your questions will be answered by the end of the session. So please do use the Zoom Q&A or the Facebook Live comments to send your question in. The report will be coming out later on today onto the website. We have a report that's just having the final touches put to it. So yeah, there's something up there already, and the full report will be later on. So what do we do at Fair Work? So Fair Work works around the world to collaborate closely with workers, with platforms, with advocates, and with policymakers to envision and build a better and fairer future of work. Through a global network of researchers based in 37 countries across 5 continents, Fair Work evaluates digital platforms, working conditions, and ranks them based on 5 principles of fair work. The project focuses on how work's experienced in the platform economy, so it's really felt by workers. And when we talk about the platform economy, we kind of mean the sector of work that's been created by digital labour platforms like Grab or like Foodpanda, for example, or in other markets like Uber. Our starting point for this whole project was that we were seeing there's a whole range of risks and harms that platform workers experience on a day-to-day basis. And part of that is structured almost through the way the work was playing out for many workers. So what sort of risks and harms were they? Well, first, there was risk around pay. Platform workers in the Philippines and in most other places in the world are classified as self-employed. So they're not employees for these platform companies. That means it's possible and actually entirely legal to pay platform workers below the minimum wage. And so there are many platform workers in the Philippines who don't earn enough to make a decent living, despite, you know, kind of turning up and working hard. We don't think that is right, or we don't think that is fair. Second, working conditions. So this focuses on the fact that a lot of platform work, here it is inherently risky. There we go. You don't have to look at my face anymore. We can look at this lovely slide. So delivery drivers weave in and out of traffic all day. Ride-hail drivers can be assaulted. You know, domestic cleaners are working in somebody else's home. That's inherently a risky place to be. So if something goes wrong and you can't work, and we combine that with the fact that they're self-employed, many workers are left with no income, which is obviously also an awful situation to find yourself in. COVID's only amplified these risks, with workers facing a double precarity. So that's the risk of illness by doing jobs that can't really be done in a socially distanced way, and the financial risk of losing a livelihood with no financial safety net, no sick pay, or anything like that if you were struck down by the virus, or if you had to care for somebody that was. Third, in relation to management, there's usually, or often we found there's no due process when it comes to disciplinary or dismissal procedures. So workers who depend on a platform can be kicked off the app without any sort of fair and due process if they get low ratings. Fourth is individualization, and there are some labour associations in the Philippines and other countries doing really important and exciting work organising platform workers and trying to hold companies to account. Some of those groups and individuals are represented today, which is really exciting. Overall, though, most platform workers don't have the sort of collective associational structural power that we see in other sectors of the economy. So they are in a structurally weaker bargaining position to begin with. The other side of that being, it obviously allows platforms to unilaterally degrade wages and working conditions over time as part of what they might call, you know, kind of disrupting the market. So as a reaction to these risks and harms, what we set out to do at Fair Work is to shed a light on how work is experienced in the gig economy. So to respond to that, we first co-developed a set of Fair Work principles with people and organisations that those kind of organisations have an impact on. So that included workers and platforms, but also trade unions, the ILO, the United Nations, and lots of other groups that we could try and speak to and workshop out. what these principles might be, so we didn't just pluck them out of nowhere. We then carry out research to evaluate platforms against those principles, and that's what the Philippines team has done so fantastically here, and that we'll get to see exactly the fruit of all that hard work. And then we use that research to give every platform a Fairwork score, and this is a score out of 10, which again my colleagues explain a bit more about in a few minutes. Our hope is that the scores spotlight where platforms are stepping up and offering fairer working conditions for workers. They also show us where that isn't happening. And as you'll see, most of the platforms in the Philippines weren't able to evidence that they have minimum standards of fair work in place. However, there is differentiation in the scores, with some platforms scoring better than others. And that means that there's that better practice is possible, and that platforms do have the ability to improve on their practices over time. It isn't all just a sad story. We believe that there can be a fair and just system of platform work out there. So rather than simply highlighting the shortfalls, the goal of Fair Work is to work with platforms and provide resources to help institutionalize better standards moving forwards. But yes, just to kind of put it on a pinhead again, the 5 principles that we can see here outlined down the side of this slide, these are structured around 5 key themes. So pay, conditions, contracts, management, and representation. As you can see, fair pay comes from this commitment that we believe workers, irrespective of any classifications, should earn a living wage after costs. And we assess earnings according to the mandated minimum wage in the local jurisdiction, as well as the current living wage. In terms of conditions, platforms we believe should have policies in place to protect workers from work-related risks and should be proactive in taking measures to protect and promote the health and safety of workers. Certainly, we see in other industries where there's been kind of collective bargaining for long periods of time, there's often very robust health and safety. Obviously, platform work is relatively novel, and so we're trying to hopefully build this into the way the platform work works. Fair contracts, additionally, terms and conditions should be accessible. They should be readable and understandable by the people that are doing the work, and they should be comprehensible from start to finish. So contracts should be in a language that workers understand and accessible at any time. Workers should also be aware of and hopefully involved in changes to the contract, regardless of the worker's employment status. The contract should be free of clauses which unreasonably exclude liability on the part of the service user and or the platform. In terms of management, we believe there should be a documented process through which workers can be heard, can appeal decisions affecting them, and be informed of the reasons behind those decisions. So there must be a clear channel of communication to workers involved in the ability to appeal management decisions or deactivation. And then the use of algorithms must be transparent and result in equitable outcomes for workers. So there should be an identifiable and documented policy that ensures equality in the way workers are managed on the platform. So, for example, around hiring, discipline procedures, firing of workers, etc. Finally, onto representation, we believe that companies and society function better when workers' voices are heard and when workers don't get punished for expressing any concerns that they have. As such, platforms should provide a documented process through which worker voice can be expressed. Irrespective of their employment classification, workers should have the right to organise in collective bodies, and platforms should be prepared to cooperate and negotiate with them. Just very finally, the Fair Work principles form the basis of how we score platforms. So each principle is broken down into 2 points. As we can see here, we have the first and the second point on this slide. The second point can only be awarded if the first point has been fulfilled. So you can't score a second point for fair pay, for example, without scoring the first point. You can, however, score the first point without scoring the second, if that makes sense. Every platform receives a score out of 10, and platforms are only given the point when they can satisfactorily demonstrate the implementation of the principles. It's important to note that failing to achieve a point doesn't necessarily mean that a platform doesn't comply with the principle in question. It simply means that we were unable to evidence its compliance. So with all of that said, I'll now give the floor back to Fairwork Philippines to talk more about their research and introduce some of the really exciting findings that we've had come out this year. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. As he mentioned, Fairwork is committed to highlighting best and worst labor practices in the platform economy. Our goal is to show that better and fairer jobs are possible in the platform economy. The Fairwork Philippines team over the last year has done extensive research and effort to connect with gig economy workers and platforms in the Philippines. The Fairwork Philippines report will be presented by Dr. Cheryl Ruth Soriano and Dr. Verhel Binghay. We are also honored to be joined by 4 panelists who will discuss and contextualize the report's findings. I am delighted to introduce Mr. Don Pangan, ang Secretary General ng Kapatiran sa Dalawang Gulong or Kagulong, Ms. Ama Carisma Lobrin Satumba of the Department of Labor and Employment, and Dr. Connie Bayudan Dakuykui, Senior Research Fellow from the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. Unfortunately, Attorney Luke Espiritu will not be able to join us today due to unforeseen circumstances. We hope for everyone's understanding. Again, thank you for attending the Fairwork Philippines report launch. We are extremely grateful to have a varied audience for this event, and we look forward to your insights. Please be reminded that opinions and perspectives are respected in this space. Also, this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website after the event. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in our Q&A feature or the live stream comment section. These will be answered towards the end of the talk. Please keep questions as concise as possible, and please be reminded that questions will be visible to all attendees. Now, may we please call on Dr. Soriano and Dr. Binghay to present the Fairwork Philippines 2022 ratings.
Good day, everyone. In many countries, like the Philippines, platform labor has attracted many informal workers, including those formerly employed workers who have lost jobs or were displaced during the pandemic. In the absence of official numbers or research estimates, close to 500,000 platform workers in the country. There could be more, in reality, as platform workers are not registered and accounted for in official statistics. While this creates a boost to a struggling economy in the pandemic, and as more and more Filipinos are by choice or lack of choice are compelled to join the gig economy, the welfare of workers need to be protected. For the Philippines, we assessed 9 of the country's largest labor platforms offering ride-hailing, logistics, and food delivery and courier against the 5 Fairwork principles discussed by Adam earlier, giving each a fairness score out of 10. Before we proceed with the findings and scores, I first talk about the methods that we use for the research. The Fairwork project uses 3 approaches to effectively measure fairness at work. First is the desk research, and this process starts with ascertaining with which platforms are operating in which city, as well as noting the largest and the most influential ones, and information of note to the scoring process, such as reviewing contracts and policies that are available in platform websites or in their official pages. And then we move on to worker interviews. We also interviewed workers directly, around 7 to 10 of them for each platform, with each interview lasting for around 45 minutes to an hour. These interviews do not aim to build a representative sample. They instead sought to understand the process of work, the experiences of the workers and the struggles that they have to go through, as well as the ways by which the policies that we have found were supposedly carried forward and experienced by workers. Then we also interviewed platform managers and we sought from them evidence in relation to the delivery of the FAIR principles. In the context of the Philippines, some of the platforms did respond positively to us and gave us evidence, while others did not. Final scores are collectively decided by the Fairwork team on all 3 forms of evidence. The scores are peer-reviewed by the country team, the Oxford team, and the 2 reviewers from other Fairwork country teams. This allows us to provide some consistency and also rigor to the scoring process. Points are only awarded when we see a clear evidence that exists for each threshold. We are not about to show the platform scores. Our hope is that these scores that we are presenting today spotlights where platforms are stepping up and offering decent and fair working conditions for workers. The scores that we reveal to you show that exploitation and dangerous working conditions aren't just accidents. They are choices made by platform companies alongside governments in its inability to come up with effective policies, as well as us in general, the users of the platform. This league table here represents the scores for the 9 platforms that we evaluated for this year's scoring. As you can see, the table represents a generally low performance overall, with some variation of how well platforms performed. Grab leads the lead table with Grab Car and Grab Express and Food obtaining 3 points, Angkas with 2 points, and Lalamove 2 points. I now go through the scores in more detail in terms of our fair work principles. I also wanted to emphasize that when platforms are not scored, it does not necessarily mean that they do not provide these particular principles. It means that we lack evidence to be able to support and ascertain that these platforms indeed are offering these particular services or policies. I first begin with fair pay. Platform workers often have substantial work-related costs to cover, such as transport between jobs, supplies, gas, insurance, and maintenance on a vehicle. Workers' costs sometimes mean their take-home earnings may fall below the local minimum wage, which is the basic threshold of decent income. Well, importantly, for the Philippines, we found that no platform could evidence that all their workers are guaranteed to take home earnings equal to or above the Philippine minimum wage of, during our research, 537 pesos. We understand that this increased a little bit in the last couple of months. Or if calculated per hour, it was 67 pesos after putting in work and incurring the costs. Although some workers who work for long hours in a day can meet the minimum wage threshold at a gross income level, many fall below it when the cost of task-specific equipment they need for performing the tasks and other work-related costs were factored in. In most contexts, including the Philippines, the minimum wage is not enough to allow workers to afford a basic but decent standard of living. We know that many worker groups have been fighting for the acknowledgement of the living wage, and that's what 1.2 pertains to. None of the platforms also obtained a score on 1.2, implying that none of them could guarantee that their workers would be able to live or get earnings above the local living wage of 710 pesos, which we computed for 2021, after factoring in the costs that they incur. Platform workers may encounter a number of risks in the course of their work, including accidents and injuries, harmful materials, and even crime and violence. To achieve this point, platforms must show that they are aware of these risks and take steps to mitigate them. So 2.1 looks at the capacity of platforms to mitigate task-specific risks. There was sufficient evidence that 4 platforms, Grab, Food, Grab Express, Lalamove, and Angkas, provided mechanisms to mitigate task-specific risks, including the provision of free accident insurance, emergency buttons, with some even providing assurance or assistance to those victimized by fake bookings. Well, we note that our fieldwork took place at the heart of the pandemic, and some of these platforms did also provide specific assistance in the context of protecting their workers for the risks of getting sick. Some platforms provide accident insurance and safety mechanisms, but at cost to platforms, but others ask their workers to pay for their own insurance. It is common also, therefore, for workers to pool together meager resources and earnings in social media groups when they fall ill or meet an accident. Ibig sabihin, sila-sila yung nag-iipon para matustusan yung pangangailangan nila kapag nagkasakit sila. 2.2, we give a point to platforms that show evidence that they are providing safety net. Bakit ito mahalaga? Platform workers are vulnerable to the possibility of abruptly losing their income as the result of unexpected or external circumstances, such as sickness or injury. Most countries provide a social safety net to ensure workers don't experience sudden poverty due to circumstances outside their control. However, platform workers usually don't qualify for these protections, such as sick pay, etc., because they are usually considered independent contractors. Some of these platforms that obtained a score provide various forms of assistance to their workers, but they were not sufficient to be considered safety nets. So we did not award any point to any platform for 2.2. Now we move on to fair contracts. There was sufficient evidence that 4 of 9 platforms, GrabCar, GrabExpress, Lalamove, and Angkas, provided clear and transparent terms and conditions for their workers. This means that the party contracting with the worker in the contract is identified and subject to the laws of the Philippines. For these platforms, there is also sufficient evidence that the contract is communicated in a clear and comprehensive language and that workers can understand them. And also, workers can access them whenever they want to. We also found evidence that workers are informed of changes in their contract terms within a reasonable time frame. For other platforms, although they are subject to Philippine laws, we did not have evidence that changes to the contracts that can have an impact on the pay or work conditions of workers were announced within a reasonable time frame before they are actually implemented. For 3.2, we are looking for contracts that have no unfair contract terms. We were not able to award at this point to any of the platforms because we found that platforms have contracts that excluded liability on the part of the platform. I now move on to fair management. Platform workers can experience various kinds of arbitrary deactivation. In short, they can get kicked out of the platform suddenly, being barred from accessing it without explanation, or even when a communication mechanism is there, this can be slow and potentially leading workers to lose their income. Workers may be subject to other penalties or disciplinary decisions without the ability to contact the service user or the platform to challenge or appeal them if they believe those decisions have been unfair. 2 platforms, GrabCar and GrabExpress and Food, were evidence to have precise communication mechanisms for workers to appeal low ratings meaningfully, non-payment or other payment issues, deactivations, and other penalties and disciplinary actions, providing workers greater recourse opportunities. We could not find sufficient evidence to award this point to other platforms. There's a lot of research out there as well showing that women and minorities tend to get worse ratings because platforms end up reflecting and reproducing societal biases that manifest through them. In 4.2, we look at how platforms show not only that they have policies against discrimination, but also that they seek to remove barriers for disadvantaged groups and promote inclusion. None of the platforms that we are scoring obtained a point for 4.2. Platforms, we encourage them to publicly articulate policies supporting equality, diversity, and inclusion, and a commitment to implementing fairness in their algorithms. Some of them already have some practices aligned to this, and we encourage them to articulate a public policy to ensure its commitment and consistent implementation. And then lastly is fair representation. Being able to organize under a recognized collective body freely is a key worker right. There are sprouting organizations doing important work on organizing platform workers, such as Kagulong, and they try to hold platform companies to account. But overall, most platform workers don't have that sort of collective, associational, structural power that we see in other sectors in the economy. So they are in a structurally weak bargaining position, which allows platforms to unilaterally degrade wages and working conditions. In the Philippine platform economy, there is still much that could be done to improve conditions in this regard, both in terms of organization of workers, 5.1, and recognition of worker-led organizations and supporting their democratic governance, or 5.2. We also, it means that workers are not given the opportunity to play a meaningful role in governance, and they are not necessarily recognizing independent collective body of workers and accompanying these with mechanisms for collective representation. I now summarize a few aspects of our key findings, noting as well the particular context of our fieldwork, which is the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. So first, many workers we interviewed joined gig work for the very first time after having been displaced during the pandemic. Some were tricycle drivers that could not, na hindi makapasada, kaya lumipat sila sa gig work. No? Nakita nila yun as an opportunity. And therefore, we say here that the, platform labor does appear, is apparent as an opportunity for many workers who have been displaced during the pandemic. But it also tells us the broader labor conditions that make platform labor, despite its challenges, palatable, becoming an essential and even main source of livelihood for many Filipinos, despite the challenges or precarious conditions that many of them experience. Number two is that many of them have experienced falling ill or feared possibilities of getting ill and infecting their families. And these concern them particularly because when they ill, they of course will not be able to earn because they are getting paid per hour or per gig. Writers try also to complete tasks as fast as they can because many platforms also monitor their performance based on completion time. This implies that they experience high risks of accidents and injuries. Another key risk that the workers shared with us is fake booking in the context of food deliveries. This is a key issue shared by many food delivery workers where they are forced to cover for losses or crowdsource help from the other workers because most platforms are unable to protect or help them for such occurrences. Regardless of the platform, workers render unpaid waiting time between jobs and between orders. And sometimes, especially at the height of the pandemic, some of the workers would tell us they would wait for an hour for some of the food orders to get packed, not before they can even deliver. They're not paid for the waiting time that they render, no, in between during the waiting times for those orders, and even while waiting for the coming of another job. And lastly, lured by the opportunities and promises of the platform economy, as we know, platforms and even the government promotes platform labor as a viable source of opportunity and income. So it pushes workers to invest in a car, sometimes a motorbike, a bike, or a mobile device. They would borrow money from money lenders or go for loans in the assumption that they would be able to recuperate this. We've talked to a few workers na nahatak yung kanilang mga sasakyan, lalo na nung pandemic na wala namang cushion or safeguard, no? Pero hindi na nila mahulugan dahil hindi naman talaga ganun ka-stable ang kita sa gig work. Some also do double payments. Nakakaltasan na sila ng platform, di ba? At tapos, nakuhulog pa sila sa contractor. So sa car, sometimes that's around 1,000 to 1,200 pesos every day na bawas sa kabuang kita na maiuwi sana nila sa kanilang mga pamilya. So on gross earnings, they may seem to be earning well, but after the costs, the fixed capital costs na hinuhulugan nila, kasama na ang onboarding, kasama na ang uniform, pati minsan ang insulated bag na binabayaran nila, and together with the daily task-specific costs like gas, mobile data, and supplies, well, they're actually living in economically precarious conditions at the net, no? Kapag natanggal na ang mga costs. And workers sometimes have to work for very long hours to earn above the minimum wage threshold after costs. So, ang sinasabi namin dito, itong pagpopromote ng platform labor as an opportunity needs to be matched with ample protections and safeguards so that workers do not fall into economically precarious conditions. I now turn you over to Dr. Verhel Binghai to continue our discussions.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Dr. Virgel Sibinghay. I'm from the UP School, University of Philippines, School of Labor and Industrial Relations. Let me continue the discussion. Filipino platform employees seldom have formal employee-employee relationship. They're freelancers, service delivery partners, and independent contractors paid per gig or service performed. As an independent contractors, they don't qualify to the crucial social protection under the Philippine labor laws. In the platform model, breaks, lunches, service incentive leave, health insurance, social security, separation pay, and retirement benefits are, etc., are typically unpaid or left to the digital labor platforms, if ever. Platforms claim to be pure technology firms or intermediaries that link delivery partners. Platforms aren't only mediators, but actually they manage or control the platform economy's labor arrangement. Now, we discuss the controls around 5 themes, and these are, as reflected in the screen, number 1, entry and allocation of work, data and transparency, pricing, ratings, and benefits, management, communication, deactivation, and mechanisms for redress. Finally, mechanisms to involve workers in democratic governance. Let me elaborate each. First, the entry, visibility, and allocation of work. The digital aspect of labor platformization dictates who may enter and who gets the job based on material provided on the platform. They assess when employees may deliver particular services and how to match them with work demand. Number 2, data transparency. Well, platforms control the type of worker data that may be shared with customers and vendors. Workers may not be aware of it. Platforms decide to do with the worker data, including what interactions and circumstances are available. Well, a lot of scholars suggest that platforms' capacity to attract investments is due to the value of digital data collected before, during, and after service offerings. The third aspect that we would like to emphasize in terms of themes is the pricing, ratings, and benefits. Platforms link a worker to a consumer, service, and rate, then extract value from the relationship. Absence of pay laws, minimum wages, means platforms have varied pay processes. In this study, many workers didn't know how their rates were computed. This was raised in the 2021 Davao rider protest. Opacity in work allocation and rate or incentive determination makes it hard to compare systems. Some vary by distance and pricing each mile. Indirect control is dictated by the platform's ability to recruit as many workers as they want, in which influences wait time and pay. Incentives may be tied to platform designated hours and days. All factors generate a race for workers to offer the finest job under hyper competition. Platforms regulate how workers are paid, which may be in cash or cashless based on the client's desire. The fourth aspect is management, communication, deactivation, and mechanisms for redress. Platforms decide entry, hiring, suspension, and deactivation processes. The platform designed to incorporate a chat box to connect with workers. The design affects how responsive or timely this support system is, if employees may contact a human representative, and whether it's pro-worker. This interface includes an assessment system that's used to calculate rewards, perks, and the future of workers on the platform. A worker on a low average score, unfavorable ratings, owing to cancellations or late delivery, may be suspended or fired. The app's chat support system enforces written and unwritten rules on riders. Workers may not know why they were penalized or suspended. In chat support, they may or may not get a response. Chat support determines appropriate platform behavior. Some platforms feature timely management and chat support systems. However, some do not. The next theme that we would like to discuss on is the mechanism to involve workers in democratic governance. The freedom of association and protection of freedom to organize protects employees' right to organize. Individual riders may feel scared to complain. As non-employees, they aren't protected from collective action. Platforms deal with protesting workers individually, since they are independent contractors, undercutting the collective voice. In Davao, bikers protested in a group. The platform addressed their complaints individually and accepted those prepared to cooperate without addressing their underlying issues. Okay. In summary, labor platforms can affect worker behavior, but may not provide fair work conditions. Workers also pay for fuel, internet data, and vehicle upkeep. These expenses include the vehicle, smartphone, onboarding, uniform, and the helmet. By socio-technical structure, platforms can retain control in less apparent ways. Because the control isn't direct, they can evade statutory obligations to promote fair working conditions. The uncertainty of platforms' roles toward its workers makes Philippine laws and regulations unprepared for this mechanism. Despite the lack of practical worker protection and support systems, the location-based platform economy continues to grow. We worry that the cultural normalization of the contractual labor management may weaken standard employment beyond the platform economy. Labor inequities will endure, possibly in various forms, unless we transition from a focus on profit and efficiency to a pro-worker one that respects and prioritizes decent working conditions toward human development. Now, let me move on. So, moving forward, okay, in light of our results, we suggest that the following steps improve platform worker conditions in the Philippines. For the platforms, first, engage directly with platforms to improve labor conditions. We urge platforms to embrace fair work principles of fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and fair representation, and attune their priorities to these standards of decent work. Next, the government. We lobby policymakers to preserve Filipino platform workers' rights. The government, therefore, must enact a policy to formalize platform workers' employment status. Due to their status as independent contractors or technology users, platform workers are denied employment rights. The vagueness of this employment classification makes it difficult to enforce minimum wage rules, resulting in pay discrepancies across platforms. Social protection is another issue. This is because platform employees are more prone to accidents, traffic infractions, and even sickness. In the transportation business, bodily injuries are unavoidable, and riders endure physical and psychological stress to retain positive ratings. Misclassification issues, or classification issues for that matter, impede workers from gaining SSS, Social Security System, Pag-ibig, PhilHealth, and the ECC when needed. Strong representation helps workers or employees negotiate social protection. Currently, only employees with employee status under local labor laws can engage in formal collective bargaining. Independent contractor status diminishes the rider's negotiating power when setting performance objectives, pay, and other safeguards. Ultimately, platform employees need to be safeguarded by labor laws, and a reform of the country's neoliberal and crisis-ridden economic policy system for decades. Well, there are interim policies, to be fair. Lawmaking in the Philippines takes time, and I guess everywhere. But employees need social protection soon. In the meanwhile, the government must offer platform employees safety and social assistance regardless of their status. Number one, the government must determine a minimum pay after cost and without overtime. Many Filipino platform workers rely only on platform jobs for revenue. Ensure equitable remuneration for workers. Number two, the government must safeguard employees for task-specific risks, following fundamental, occupational, and health standards. Mandating portable accident and health insurance for workers who travel between platforms can also be an essential step. Without legal safeguards, some platform workers handle their individual social security. Well, the two suggestions are in the DOLE Advisory 14/2021. The government must execute this policy so platform workers may invoke it and be adequately protected. The government must compel access to communication systems that allow the workers to communicate operational problems or appeal suspension or deactivations. Many platforms want to deal with workers individually and refuse to recognize worker collectives. The government must act to guarantee platform employees may constructively express their collective voice without being fired. The government must review the laws that prevent employees from making minimum wage. Setting a ceiling on transportation network vehicle services fees must balance consumer concerns and ensure workers may earn minimum wage after all the expenses. Well, there's another significant actor that has got to play in this movement, and that is the workers and civil society. Kagulong or Kapatiran sa Dalawang Gulong advocates for riders' working conditions. Kagulong worried about organizing platform employees due to apathy or fear of firing. Helping employees engage in social dialogue might motivate them to join collectives or develop new ones to voice concerns collectively. For this to happen, legal mechanisms and safeguards must be in place to assure workers won't be disadvantaged. or for associating or voicing demands collectively. Still, in a greater society, media, civil society organizations, government, research groups, and customers are urged to encourage fair labor in the platform economy. Fairwork Philippines wants to raise awareness about the plight of workers in this sector. For this report, customers and the broader Filipino public may not realize that their delivery person or rider is a worker who deserves fundamental rights and benefits. They aren't aware of platforms' obligations to workers or how they may improve conditions. We therefore seek and influence as many actors as possible to support Fairwork's vision of a better world of work.
Thank you, Dr. Soriano and Dr. Binghay. I hope the participants enjoyed the presentation and hopefully we will have a very productive open forum session. So now we will invite our panelists to share their responses to the report. We also wish to remind the audience that you are free to post your questions in the Q&A section of this Zoom space, or if you are joining via social media live streams, in the comments section. Please keep questions as concise as possible and be reminded that questions will be visible to all attendees. Again, a warm welcome to our panelists. It's an honor to have you all joining us for this launch, and we are looking forward to your inputs. Let us now give our panelists the floor to share their assessment of the current state of the Philippines gig economy. This can include what they consider as key challenges and pathways for advancing decent conditions of work. Para sa ating panelists, maaari rin kayo mag-share ng insights o comments tungkol sa Fairwork Philippines report. Malaking tulong ang inyong expertise para sa pagpapalawak at pagpapalalim ng diskusyon sa usapin ng gig economy sa Pilipinas. So now we may start the panel assessment. Para sa ating first respondent, may we please call on Sir Don Pangan from Kagulong. Sorry, it should be. Let's call on Ms. Satumba from Dole to share her response for the Philippines report. Thank you.
First of all, congratulations to the Fairwork Philippines for today's launching of their first independent investigation on the working conditions in the Philippine platform economy. Let me recognize the efforts exerted in coming up with this very significant initiative to exchange insights and learnings from one another. Undeniably, rapid technological advances and increased online connectivity have reshaped business models and changed the way we work. And we have embraced these technological advances, especially in this pandemic. As we notice an increase in labor market access and entrepreneurship and innovation, we are faced with challenges on existing labor and social frameworks. This opens an opportunity for positive transformation by addressing decent work deficits. The report highlighted the ambiguity of this platform workers' employment status, which has numerous implications. Primarily, the social protection coverage is low, making them susceptible to risks and vulnerabilities. In addition, the self-employment status in our social security system make it difficult for them to meet the eligibility requirements for statutory access to benefit schemes due to low earnings and insufficient contribution periods. Thus, it compels us to rethink our social protection systems and explore innovations by encouraging the portability of benefits, exploring platforms to leverage group benefits program covering sickness or injury, or incorporating mental health coverage, among others. Another challenge of this ambiguity is the difficulty in measuring digital platform work. Labor force surveys do not fully capture platform work, but we are grateful to surveys, to research institutes and private entities for their surveys and studies, which gave us insights that shed light on the current situation of the digital platform workers. This calls for the enhancement of our household and individual surveys, such as the labor force surveys and ICT usage surveys, by possibly adding questions on new work arrangements to capture the trend accurately and how work is done in the platform economy. Moreover, administrative data such as registration from digital platforms can provide substantial baseline information on the number of platform workers. Such pieces of information will provide evidence and encourage informed decision making. As our platform workers are generally classified as freelancers or independent contractors, they are governed by contracts or agreements. The document governs the relationship between platforms and their workers. Its content may affect both parties, especially the workers, particularly on their rights, duties, and obligations. The government, as a third actor in the platform work, could impart assistance in the contract making process by exploring the possibility of um, having a model contract in which its contents will be framed from a series of consultations and dialogues with platform workers and platform operators, including its merchants and clients. By doing this, contracts will not become contracts of adhesion, but contracts that promote good governance and will harmonious relationship between both parties. Overall, achieving fair contracts in the platform work is a shared responsibility. Hence, this emphasizes social dialogue as an essential ingredient as we grapple with the changing world of work. Consultation and collaboration among government institutions, platform workers, and digital platforms are essential in information sharing, building trust and commitment towards effective and sustainable development in the sector. While we recognize that platform workers are dispersed, platform cooperativism offers an alternate model. We can draw lessons from France's co-op cycle, a federation of bike delivery co-ops, enabling bicycle messengers to stand united, reduce their costs through resource pooling, and create a strong bargaining power to protect the bikers' rights. You may access this issue paper from our ILS website. It is entitled Disrupting Together, Exploring Platform Cooperativism as a Pathway to Ensuring Decent Work in the Digital Labor Market. The rating system of the platform and the workers is another interesting dimension that could be integrated with the fairness principles. The complexity of rating algorithms should be explained in the simplest manner possible to workers for objectivity and transparency. It could also be reassessed so it will not only focus on maintaining customers' demand, but should also transform into a digital mechanism that will attend to work-related matters such as pay, deactivation, or suspension of work. The road to achieving fair principles and work is not without challenges, but what is important in the course of realizing fair work is the unwavering commitment of all actors to have their share of contribution, such as this study by Fairwork Philippines, or by taking part in consultative mechanisms. At iisa po tayo ng goal at ang gusto po natin ay ang desentralized trabaho para sa lahat. Kaya patuloy po tayo na magsama-sama, mag-engage po sa social dialogue, no? Para po ito ay isa katuparan, pati na sa lahat ng manggagawa, pati na sa ating platform workers. Maraming salamat po ulit at mabuhay po.
Thank you very much, Ms. Satumba from the Department of Labor and Employment. Para sa ating susunod na respondent, may we please call on Sir Don Pangan from Kagulong.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon po, everyone. First of all, we would like to affirm all the data and information gathered by Fairwork Philippines with regards to the conditions of the platform workers. With that, Kagulong would like to congratulate all of you for the hard work and patience. This study will be Kagulong's best reference in our advocacy to advance struggle for our gig riders who have been tagged as mga bagong bayani sa kalsada, lalo na nitong panahon ng pandemya. Nais ko lamang pong magpalawig ng konti sa ilang puntos na ni-raise sa naturang research at report. Sa una, malaking usapin sa ngayon ang diminishing take-home pay ng ating mga kapatid na food delivery riders. Lalo nating napatunayan ito nung magkondukta tayo ng panayam sa kanila itong nakaraang Hunyo. Gusto kasi natin silang kumustahin nung mga panahon na yun na sunod-sunod yung pagtaas ng presyo ng gasolina. Sa aming panayam ay nalaman namin na umaabot na lamang sa average na 800 pesos ang kinikita ng ating mga kapatid na riders kung sila ay kakayod sa loob ng 8 hanggang 10 oras. Nabawasan na daw ang booking nang magsimulang makalabas na yung mga tao at pwede nang kumain sa mga fast foods at restaurants. Setting aside the work-related cost, tulad ng gasolina na kung dati sapat na yung 200 pesos sa gasolina, ngayon ay kailangan may 300 pesos sila kada araw para dito dahil sa pagtaas ng presyo. Nagtatabi pa sila ng 50 pesos kada araw para sa monthly maintenance at contingency sakaling masira ang kanilang motor. At ang 100 to 200 pesos na budget weekly para sa kanilang load, para maka-access sa kanilang apps. Hindi pa natin sinama sa kwenta yung ibang gastusin nila tulad ng sa uniforme, sa mga thermal box at iba pang mga kagamitan. No? So lalabas na 428 pesos and 58 centavos na lamang po ang naiuwi ni rider sa kanyang pamilya. This confirms Fairwork Philippines study that they are now earning below minimum wage. At sobrang layo sa daily cost of living kung pagbabatayan natin ang isinagawang pag-aaral ng Partido Manggagawa na kailangan ng 1,300 pesos kada araw ang family of 5. Kahit mag-asawa pa silang kumayod bilang delivery rider ay kulang na kulang ang kanilang kikitain. Habang ang mga kumpanya ay hindi nagagalaw yung average na 20% na kanilang parte sa delivery fee na nagkakahalaga ng milyong-milyong piso na naggagaling sa pinagpagura ni rider. Ikalawa, sa usapin ng kondisyon, hindi naman talagang lingid sa kaalaman na ng lahat na gaano kadelikado ang pagmumotor considering our road conditions dito sa ating bansa. Nitong pandemya, isa sila sa mga vulnerable sectors sa virus contamination dahil maghapon at magdamag sila sa kalsada. Nakataya ang kalusugan ng mga kapatid na rider, pero dahil freelancer or independent contractor daw sila, ay walang pananagutan ng mga kumpanya sa anumang mangyari sa kalsada. Walang proteksyon, walang aasahan, sakaling magkasakit o maaksidente. Ikatlo, sa usapin ng representasyon, malayang pag-organisa at malayang pagpapahayag. Ito ay isang malaking hamon sa kanila dahil nga doon sa takot na ma-deactivate o mawala ng hanap buhay. Kadalasan kasi ginagawa ng mga kumpanya na kapag nag-oorganisa ang mga riders at kumikilos upang ipahayag ang kanilang mga grievances, ay tinatanggalan sila ng access sa apps. Tulad na lang na nangyari sa mga riders sa Foodpanda, sa Davao at sa Manila at sa Lala Move noong 2021 kung sila ay magkilos protesta. Ito ay sa katwiran ng mga kumpanya na hindi naman sila empleyado at may karapatan sila na tanggalin ng mga riders kung nais nila. Kahit kahit ng ating gobyerno sa magitan ng Department of Labor and Employment ay medyo tali dito dahil walang malinong na pulisiya hinggil sa kanilang employment status. Kaya nung nakipag-dialogue kami noong April 2021 sa magitan ng National Employment Recovery Summit ng NERS, ay niraise namin ang usapin ng proteksyon at seguridad sa trabaho ng mga kapatid nating mga delivery riders. Nananawagan tayo na magbuo sila ng TWG na binubuo ng mga riders groups, gobyerno, labor groups at maging ng mga kumpanya na pag-usapan at pag-aralan ng kalagayan ng mga kapatid nating delivery riders at makalikha ng pulisiya na siyang magbibigay sa kanilang proteksyon at seguridad sa kanilang trabaho. Ngunit hanggang sa ngayon ay wala pa kaming naririnig kung kailan magaganap to. So, bukod dito, kami po ay nakikipag-usap na rin sa ilang mga senador tulad ni Senator Ison Teberos at Senator J.B. Ercito na tignan ng kalagayan, tignan ng posibilidad na magkaroon ng isang batas na magbibigay ng proteksyon sa ating mga delivery riders. Again, yun lamang po at congratulations po sa Fairwork Philippines sa kanilang report.
Thank you very much, Sir Don Pangan. Para sa ating huling respondent, may we please call on Dr. Dakuykuy from PIDS.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me congratulate the Fairwork Philippines for coming up with the report. It actually provided invaluable information that helps in generating further questions and insights. And in particular, I know that there are also reports that are done in Indonesia, and I try to compare the reports here done by the Fairwork Philippines. And there are observations and insights that I'd like to share with you. One is, one observation that I had was that the same platform business model were rated by both Fairwork Indonesia and Fairwork Philippines, which is GrabCar. And I just noticed that the Fairwork Indonesia gave GrabCar 5. Hello, can you hear? Okay, so I just noticed that. Okay, wait, let me just fix my. Is better? This is better. Okay. So
Yes.
as I was saying, I tried to compare. Is this better? This is better. Okay, so sorry for the glitches. So as I was saying, I tried to compare Fairwork Indonesia and Fairwork Philippines report, and I noticed that both reports had rated GrabCar, and Fairwork Indonesia gave 5 for GrabCar, while Fairwork Philippines gave 3. And so I'm assuming that the ratings are standard, and I just come to think that is it worth looking into what accounts for the differences in the rating? Meaning, do this underscores regulatory deficits being bigger here in the Philippines than in Indonesia? That's one question. The second question is that, do this difference in rating underscore inadequate enabling environments here in the Philippines? For example, do we lack voice and representation here in the Philippines more than in Indonesia? So that's one observation and insight that I had. And then the second is that I also noticed that in both reports, regional and bigger platforms have higher scores than relative to local platforms. And one would think that local platforms would be more attuned to the needs of the local labor market, and thus they are more likely to help in attaining decent work. But as the both reports have demonstrated, that is not the case. And this actually highlights the need to come up with standards. And these standards should be applicable to platforms regardless of size and origin. So in terms of pathways to address decent work in platform, I'd like to I have 2 sets, long run and short run, which I think we already discussed by by the presenters earlier. In the long run, I think that it's very important to amend the labor code to clarify the definition and set the standards of working conditions given the proliferations of these non-standard work arrangements. That's one. And then second is that there is a need to adjust the rules and practices for collective bargaining agreements, because currently only those with employment relations are represented by CBAs. And so there has to be some sort of adjustments in order for workers from non-standard work arrangements to be given voice and representation. Now, in the short run, while a careful amendment to the labor code is on its way, the government and all stakeholders need to work together. And it's important to note that the premise here is that platforms can always innovate and they can always change their business models in response to regulation. So for example, in Spain, there is one platform there that changed its business model to circumvent the provisions establishing the presumption of employment in the rider law. And so in its revised system, the riders have more autonomy since they can freely log in, log out, they can select time slots, they can refuse deliveries and subcontract to other workers. Therefore, the employment relations that are associated with command and wage have already broken down. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that platforms, they can always innovate, they can always adjust. So given this premise, there is a need, and I'm echoing Edie Satumba's insight on social dialogue. There is always a need to conduct robust consultations with different platforms and workers to understand working conditions and set minimum standards in pay and security that is approved by all stakeholders. And if it's approved by all stakeholders, it's going to make regulations likely to be successful. Second, the national government can also explore innovative tools like, for example, experimental regulatory sandbox. So a sandbox is a controlled and time-bound environment that allows for live testings of technology, services, business models, policies, and it can be a valuable tool in order to determine the workers' employment classification and social protection schemes that can work on platforms. So just last 2 points, ways forward for Fairwork Philippines to also look into other on-demand platforms. Right now, the focus is more on ride-hailing, courier, food delivery service, and there are other on-demand work on platforms like care work, massage services, cleaning and maintenance, which can have different issues and which can have bigger issues in terms of control and command and in terms of gender-based violence. That's the first one. The second is that big platforms, they operate at the regional level. Thus, there is probably a need for ASEAN to craft a governance framework. And I think that Fair Work project is in a very good position to look into this, given its conversation with stakeholders, not only in the ASEAN, but all over the world. Thank you. That's just my comment.
Again, thank you very much to our panel for an incredibly insightful discussion on the current state of the Philippine gig economy. So we already received a couple of questions via the Q&A Zoom feature. So we compiled all of them and will be directing the questions to our panelists and the co-authors. So now we will open the floor to the questions from our audience. So the first question that we received is from Sir Benjamin Velasco. Has Fairwork read the recent NLRC arbiter decision on Davao Foodpanda riders? How does the decision compare with Fairwork's assertion of app control of work? We invite specifically maybe Prof. Dong and Sir Don, and we invite all other panelists who wish to contribute in the discussion.
Chana, I tried to answer the question on the chat also. So what I pointed out in the chat is that it appears like, thankfully, our reading of the ways controls are embedded in the platform management system towards their workers is the same with the NLRC reading. So the NLRC reading has been positive on the side of the workers. Of course, that can be appealed still at the level of the Supreme Court, but at the very least, there is that NLRC decision to affirm their reading that controls are indeed huge and akin to regular employment kind of controls. So our other panelists might have any other thoughts, but
yeah, I agree with Dr. Soriano here. It is just at the level of the NLRC, and the thing is appealable. But that is a very good move because it is favorable to the workers. But what is really crucial is for the government to really once and for all define the classification of these gig workers, in this particular case, the riders, so that the confusion about their status and the abuse about their status would be eliminated. So it is important that there is a macro policy. And I go with Dr. Bakuyko's emphasis on the need for the labor code to be revisited because indeed it's really archaic. No, the labor code could no longer could no longer be in tune with the fast-moving economic circumstances that we are in right now, especially in the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you for that, Prof. Dong. So that was Dr. Virgil Binghai. Any other panelists who wish to add to the conversation? All right, so I think we can move forward. To Sir Benjamin, if you have any follow-up commentary or insights to your question, please feel free to send them over via the Q&A feature. So now we can move to the next question. This is from Sir Alvin Neil Gutierrez. There are efforts of the academe to help the riders when it comes to road safety. Have you heard of the 13th International Conference on Applied Human Factors and Ergonomics? They have a session on vulnerable road user safety, haptic interfaces, and technological interventions that focused on helping these riders. So I invite the panel to comment on this. Thank you.
No, thank you for pointing that out to the attendee. I guess these efforts by the academe and by other members of the civil society are very much appreciated because they're meant to help our riders. But what we also are pointing out here is that, well, the main actors that are supposed to be acting on and coming up with important interventions are not always forthcoming. And those are from the platforms. So I guess the report is kind of directed that, not to the attention, our attention as well, that, well, it's great that a lot of the different aspects of civil society are coming together to come up with data, to come up with designs, to help workers navigate the road better. Yeah, but it's got to come from various sides, no, of the equation.
Definitely. So thank you for that, Sir Alvin. We have a question from Zenta Nishio from Kyoto University, Japan. I have been researching public transport, especially jeepney drivers here in the Philippines. My question is about communication between traditional transport sector and platform labor. Is there any arrangement for it, or is still there a gap? And I would like to know workers' informal associations for the risk. What role of these associations now? So I think she's inquiring about the communication between the traditional transport sector, specifically the jeepney system, and the platform labor here in the Philippines. So may I invite the panel to comment on this question?
Baka magandang marinig natin ang opinion ni Don dito kung merong any form of
Well, I guess the
synergy.
situation of the traditional group of transport workers, they're still there, and their situation is deplorable. Their circumstances are quite different from that of
Dr.
the
Binghai, please turn on your your video so that our audience can see you.
Well,
Thank
well,
you,
I guess
Prof.
the situation of the two are almost the same. They're both precarious workers. However, there are also differences. While the aggregation of workers relative to this sector are present, and I think my colleague here, Dr. Professor Benjamin Velasco, is here and asking the first question would know that because he is so engaged about transport sector workers, particularly in the traditional transport workers like the jeepney drivers, so to speak. So they're there. The associations are there, and in the pretext of the freedom of association. So, but what we're talking here is about a more formal scenario because I think the drivers, the ordinary drivers, except for those coming from big buses, no. But the jeepney drivers are more on the informal sector, operated by small scale organizations or just very small micro enterprise. But when you talk about this thing, we're talking even of global companies with brands, and it's unthinkable not for them not to protect the workers. So the situation is different. The situation is different. The ordinary workers in the traditional transport sector are there expressing their collective voice via mass actions but not for the purpose of collective bargaining agreement. I think what we are after here is that eventually these workers in the platform would be able to really fully express their voice and engage in collective bargaining in the hope that the terms and conditions of employment will be improved significantly. But both are precarious workers.
Thank you
I do
for
not
that,
know.
Prof. Dong.
Mm.
Can we call on Dr. Adam to comment on the lessons of worker synergy between platform workers with other unions? Maybe you can comment on this. Thank you, Dr. Adam.
Yeah, for sure. I think as well, it's important to add to what's been said there that many of the bigger international platform companies, often if we look at their IPO documentation, for example, see public infrastructure as a route to profit. That's part of what they're selling to investors. For some firms, is to kind of take over public infrastructure. Certainly in the US and the UK as well, that's the kind of road to profit. So it's important to acknowledge that platforms are also destabilizing public as well as private mobility in this case, and that there is a shared solidarity to be had between public workers and private platform company workers as well. In terms of synergy, it's a really interesting one. So we're seeing different regions often will have like meetings between representatives of worker associations, for example, like the Transnational Federation of Couriers has been one, where we'll see representation from different struggles essentially across different groups of workers. And these are really important, right, to draw on these long histories of labour activism from sectors that are well rehearsed and know how to conduct strikes and protests, as well as making sure that resistance is being articulated by the workers themselves in the platform economy. So trying to build these spaces where it comes together can be highly effective in terms of moving forward. Of course, it still often relies on national legal contexts. It relies on having open avenues to engage, and if not, then it's about building effective strategies to demand platforms engage, and that's often through public demonstrations of resistance, picketing, protests, that kind of stuff. If that makes sense, if that's a useful addition.
Thank you for that, Dr. Adam. So can we call on Sir Don from Kagulong to comment on if they work with other workers' organizations in the Philippines, kung meron tayong partnerships or like engagement sa mga ibang worker organizations dito sa Philippines?
Kagulong, first and foremost, is a member of a bigger labor coalition, which is Nagkaisa Labor Coalition. So it composes of different labor groups nationwide. Bukod doon, we share common issues with other transport groups. Recently, we have joined the coalition, the Stop NCAP coalition. But mainly, these are common problems in the road. Medyo magkaiba kasi talaga yung issues ng mga gig riders natin tsaka ng mga jeepney drivers. Pero at some issues nagkakasama-sama po kami. Yun nga, recently dun sa usapin ng NCAP, dun sa no contact apprehension policies ng ating gobyerno. Tapos internationally, ang Kagulong, siguro may add ko na rin karugtong na rin nung sinabi ni Adam na we have been having coordinations with other platform riders in Myanmar, in Malaysia, Hong Kong, in Germany. So we have been sending solidarity statements and supporting their cause also.
Thank you for that, Sir Don. Anyone else who wants to add to the conversation? Yes, Adam, please feel free. Thank you.
Yeah, just something I forgot to say as well that Sedona reminded me of is that often for some platform companies, there are key markets that are profitable and a lot of other markets that are less profitable. And what we've seen is that where collective action can be taken and where it can be coordinated across sectors, it's often about finding the most profitable market as therefore the most important place to try and gain leverage, if that makes sense, in these struggles. And it's often where international solidarity ends up playing into that as well as a really important factor, not only in terms of showing platforms that there's a unified message, but also in terms of workers demonstrating to each other that there are international shared conditions, international shared issues, and that there might be an internationalization of the solution too.
I think it is also very important that the traditional transport group of workers and the gig workers, this time the riders, must coalesce with one another and have a joint lobby for their interests, for those that are similar to each other, for those with respect to issues where they converge. But as I said earlier, and as also said by Don here, there is a distinct need for the gig workers. This is a specialized type of work, which I guess our government is really unprepared to handle at this point in time because for lack of legislation.
Thank you for that, everyone. For the interest of time, we can take on 2 more questions. So from an anonymous participant, he or she said, what's your take on these companies paying employees with fat competitive salaries and having headquarters in posh business districts and buildings, and yet the core of their business, which are the riders, are earning badly? I invite anyone to comment on this question. Thank you very much.
I mean, I could comment very quickly to get the ball rolling. I feel very strongly about this. I used to work as a food delivery courier myself for 2.5 years. And I would often cycle past the headquarters of the offices that I was working for whilst earning less than minimum wage. Workers aren't blind to the irony of these two things being placed next to each other, like incredible wealth and power on one side and perhaps experiencing their own conditions. I think that points to perhaps the importance of Fair Work as a project, yes, but also and more significantly of workers that are taking action to try and build strength within the workforce, to try and address some of these imbalances, who can see that essentially playing out on the street. But that's, I'll give way. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say, but yes, it shows that often there may well be money in the system because it's paying for priorities at this end. But what we're seeing is, for example, no platform scored any points for fair pay in these scores. That may be a juxtaposition that we can kind of draw out. I don't know.
And I think this makes our project more relevant because it could serve as a wake-up call for this, for the lack of term, for these capitalists to exploit the poor workers. It is important that through these ethical dimensions must be put into place, into practice whenever you're doing business.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Dr. Adam and Prof. Dong. Dr. Soriano, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, like my co-panelists, I feel very strongly about this. I guess in the Philippines, we're so used to huge inequalities all around us. We can feel it, we can see it, we can breathe the inequality. But I guess what we want to emphasize in the report is that behind platforms are human beings. It's not just a technology. There are human beings behind the design. And we need to work on the governance of platforms that are anchored on social justice and not just profit. I think if we work within that principle of social justice, well, platforms as well as many other organizations will recognize that they need to treat their workers fairly, equally, not just those that are within their midst, their regular employees, but also everyone else who's, well, giving their blood, sweat, and tears, from which platforms also generate value from.
Yes, Dr. Adam, please feel free to add.
Oh yeah, I know we're short on time, but very briefly as well, just to say globally, we're seeing platforms are starting to realize exactly what Cheryl's saying and that they need to move towards sustainability. So some platforms we see turnover rates of 500% staff turnover, which means like the average staff member stays on there for like a month and a half or something like that, you know. So platforms are starting to recognize that they need to engage in sustainable practice, that workers need to be able to make a living if the platform is going to sustain. And I think that's why this project's so important at this time in platform growth and in the rise of the platform economy, because we're moving into that stage of kind of more sustainable practice, hopefully. And if we can get to the point where that's being built with these principles in mind, and with recognition agreements with workers, that would be fantastic. We might have a platform economy that's good for everyone for a long time, which would be the goal.
Thank you for that.
I think it is
Go
very important that since these platform companies are big anyway, they should have a full-blown HR department who will have to take care of the people under their fold. It is important that the basic principles of decent work will have to be implemented in their own roof. And I think the primary actor for this will be the HR practitioners. And I think they are in a capacity to really employ people with caliber, with the competencies to deliver the function.
And
Okay.
if I may add,
Go
hello,
ahead,
Sana.
Dr. Dakoy. Yes po.
If I may add, I think that it's really important to also look for champions who can craft policies that will ensure that the ecosystem will be sustainable, and at the same time the platforms will grow and that they will grow responsibly.
Thank you. Actually, that's a very good transition to our next question. The next question is from Miss Ava. She asks, where are we right now with representing the gig workers within the Congress or Senate? So may I invite Dr. Soriano or maybe even Dr. Dakoy to answer this question?
From my understanding, triggered by the Foodpanda protests in Davao last year, there was a Senate convening of for the Senate resolution, I think that number 732, to address the conditions of safety of workers, including questions about their pay. I guess the question should be thrown back to Don Pangan on whether they have been involved at all in these discussions by the Senate. He mentioned something about trying to get there. Well, we invited members of the Senate here too. Unfortunately, they couldn't join us. But I think that's important. No? The regulation, the regulatory aspect is of course important. So maybe I'll throw it over to Don. Don, may oportunidad ba tayo na maimbita sa mga Senate hearings at congressional hearings?
Yung pong resolution na binabanggit nyo ay resolution po ng author ay si Senator Risa Ontiveros. And we've been talking with the Senator Risa Ontiveros since last year. Siya talaga yung nagpupush nung na magkaroon ng investigation or Senate inquiry on the plight of the platform workers. Kasi they were alarmed dun sa sunod na protest and actions at yung tanggalan dun sa na nangyari last 2020 and 2021. So aside from Senator Risa Ontiveros, we've been also talking with Senator J.B. Ercito. So both sides tayo nakikipag-usap. And he's willing to listen to us, and probably they can also file a resolution or a bill. But syempre, they are also waiting for DOLE. Ang importante dito yung ating primary agency na nangako rin kasi sa atin na magpapatawag siya ng technical working group to study the conditions of the platform workers at and the questions of their employment status. So that's important. Kanina gusto ko sumagot dun sa pagkukumpara dun sa mga workers in the offices and in the first place, gig riders are not being treated as employees. So what can you expect from that?
Thank you very much, Sir Don. So I think we can move to our last question. So this is from, sorry, yes, Dr. Soriano.
Chana, I think, well, before we close, and I don't know if we can accommodate another question, pero I wanted to make sure that we get to respond to Dr. Connie's two important points. the one question on Grab and why the scoring is different between Grab Indonesia and Grab Philippines, and then also the point on platform co-ops, which I think Ada might be able to respond to in the experience of understanding the sprouting platform co-ops all over the world. So I guess in terms of the question on Grab Philippines, I'm glad that you raised that. And this is something that we also try to align and look at within the whole Fairwork network. In Grab Indonesia, I think comparatively, what we differed on is 2.2 and 4.2. That's the question on safety net. And then the next one is the question on fair management, specifically on fair algorithms. One important thing to note is that the scores across countries are not always easily comparable because the principles operationalization have changed over the time that the 2021 report of Indonesia was undertaken. Yung fieldwork nun was done in 2020. Our fieldwork was done in 2021. Fairwork changed some of the operationalization of our principles. So that's one. Pero now that we are aligning, Indonesia is doing their second year, and we compared our analysis, and there seems to be a kind of an alignment for the same set of operationalization of the principles. Having said this, I think your question on how do regulatory environments, enabling environments, maybe affect the discrepancies in scores. One thing that we noticed is about the provision of safety net. So when we were doing our research, for example, for some platforms, there are provisions of a safety net, say a sick leave, up to 180 days when they operate in Singapore. But that service is not available for Filipino workers. And we asked the question, why? Why not? No? And maybe, I don't have a clear answer to this yet, but perhaps it's because there's greater pressure in Singapore versus less pressure in the context of the Philippines. So maybe there is, and this needs further research from our end as well. Maybe the question on co-ops, Dr. Adam or Dr. Bingay, or yes.
Hi, Dr. Cheryl. If I just may say something, that's why I think it's important that the ASEAN nations should come together and maybe come up with some sort of code of conduct for all these regional platforms that everybody has to be like a standard applicable to all countries that they are operating in, I think.
Yeah, I agree with the necessity to put a universal code of conduct. I think these companies, especially the big ones, global in that sense, are acting global but operating locally. And so it's also important that our local circumstances must be improved. And the role of the government here is really very crucial to put up policies that are enabling for a sustainable, at the same time, for the welfare of these poor workers.
Okay, thank you for that, everyone. So for our last question, before we wrap up our open forum, it's from Ms. Angie Balibay from Good News Pilipinas. Given the fail marks of the Philippine app-based riders vis-a-vis the Fairwork standards, what is this group's next steps to address the situation? Will DLSU and Fairwork supply the research results to relevant national government agencies or legislative chambers for solutions? Will you be making calls for better working conditions? Thank you. Go ahead, panel, if anyone wants to comment.
Well, yes, to the question. We will continue on until year 2. What was presented by Dr. Bingay earlier is a multi-stakeholder kind of a push, no, for different actors in the society to contribute towards pushing platforms to do better. And this has to come from the platforms themselves. Hopefully, the managers will talk to us a little bit more, but also pay heed or pay attention to the scores and also the ways specifically they are managing the conditions of their workers. But there's also a push, so we will continually engage with government as well, and try to give our inputs into Senate or congressional discussions on the platform economy. But importantly, and I think this will be an important segue to the pledge later, right? To civil society, what we have been trying to point out is that many of us don't really realize that platform workers, the people we meet on the door when they deliver, for us, we see them as delivery workers. We might not be too conscious that they're actually workers with rights. And we all need to be kind of conscious about that so that we can continually come together to push platforms to do better towards this.
Thank you, Dr. Soriano. So anyone else before
I
we end?
think
Go ahead, Prof.
Chana,
Dong. Yes, go,
Chana,
go ahead.
I think the findings of the study, especially if this will be published, would make more people aware of it. In some countries, there's the presence of consumers union, and they only buy products and services from those that practice ethical thing, no? And I hope in the Philippines this will also going to be the case, that due to awareness, we will have to patronize those companies that really deliver goods ethically and more responsibly with their workers. I think this is the point, especially that we are in the digital era, and communicating things out is easier than it was then before.
Thank you, Prof. Dong, for that.
Chana,
Go
it
ahead,
might
Dr.
be an
Soriano.
opportune time to point out the point on platform co-ops, right? But also where the imperative of platform co-ops, where the impetus for platform co-ops can actually come from. So, andyan dyan na ang kagulong. We already have kagulong. Riders are organizing. Paano naman yung mga car drivers, di ba? There are also those, di ba? How to organize them, but also how to help them think through being a platform co-op. So what impetus is needed, and also what mechanisms are needed so that we can have an alternative business model, which is, for example, a platform co-op. So maybe Adam can share some thoughts. Paano ba nagsisimula? How can we begin this? If ever workers might want to think about the possibility of organizing as a co-op.
Yeah, for sure. Very briefly, I know we're aware of time, but just to say that we're seeing different co-ops emerge, particularly in different regions as well, which is really exciting. So, for example, in Latin America, there's a long history of cooperative working, and we're seeing platform co-ops spring up in Latin America in a much bigger way than in any other markets, I think. There's also European examples, which, in terms of what you were saying about what it takes to start it, often I think people don't realize that when delivery drivers come to their door, for example, or ride-hail drivers take them from place to place, not only are they workers with rights, they're also like really intelligent people that are really inquisitive and totally have the skills to organize stuff. Sometimes that doesn't include the technical back end that platforms require. Sometimes it does. And what we've seen, for example, it's well worth people looking at, is something called Co-op Cycle, for example, with reference to delivery and logistics. That's a European federation, basically, where they've formed a co-op that has built a platform backend that is modular, so it can be used in lots of different contexts. And then groups of workers that want to start their own cooperative approach Co-op Cycle and say, hey, can we use your software, please? And Co-op Cycle say, yeah, of course, as long as you're a co-op, you can use our software. What would you like it to do? So would you like to be able to track this that riders are doing, or would you like to be able to manage prices in this way? And then they build a system that is tailored to the local context. After a year of being part of it, you then get voting rights on the future of the whole Co-op Cycle mission. So that's well worth looking at in terms of an example of what might be necessary, and also that I believe is open way outside of Europe. I think they entertain and have speak to people about starting cooperative efforts outside. But yeah, that's the only other important thing I would say on co-ops. Is there's obviously different types of co-ops as well. Some are full co-ops, so all workers are engaged in decisions around management, day-to-day running, and probably do multiple roles within the co-op. Others are more like profit sharing schemes, so they might not get agency in the management process, but they will get a cut of the profits. These two are obviously vastly different models and have to be looked at differently, and different things will work for different workers. What's key is that the group of workers themselves who come together to form these companies get agency over the process. But yeah, I'll finish there because I don't want to take up loads.
Thank you, everyone. Very, very insightful discussion with our panelists and our participants. So again, thank you for participating in our open forum. So I hope our participants learned a lot from the report launch, and hopefully next time you order from these platforms, you get a new layer of perspective when understanding gig work in the Philippines. So now we will move on with the program in a few seconds or in a few minutes. So please stand by. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us until the very end. So the Fairwork Philippines report will be available on the Fairwork website today. So you may visit the Fairwork website at www.fair.work, or you may specifically visit www.fair.work/ph for the scores and www.fair.work/ph-report for the specific report. So again, thank you for participating and being with us until the very end. So after this session, you might ask, what can you do to support platform workers in the Philippines? This is why we created the Fairwork Pledge. So now let's call on Ms. Marge Lanzador Medina, our co-author, to help us introduce the Fairwork Pledge. Sorry, Marge, you're on mute. Thank you.
So we've heard about how different platform companies operating in the Philippines are choosing to either integrate or ignore basic standards of fairness in how they manage their workforces, as we saw in the low scores across the board. So also we've had a fruitful discussion in the Q&A, and like what Shanna said, maybe some of you are asking, what can we do, right? So we are calling on all organizations to publicly demonstrate the commitment to fair working conditions in the platform economy through the Fairwork Pledge, as you can see on the screen. So it's a pledge to do more to pay attention to the working conditions of gig workers. So this is an open invitation to all kinds of organizations, universities, schools, businesses, investors, and charities. So all of these organizations can make a difference by supporting good labor practices in the gig economy. So please know more about the Fairwork Pledge at fair.work/pledge, or more conveniently, you may also scan the QR code on the slide. So please ask your organization to sign the pledge today. Okay? Inaasahan namin ang inyong participation and commitment. Maraming salamat, and back to you, Chana.
Thank you for that, Marge. So again, we hope that organizations present in this launch will look at the pledge, and hopefully we get your support and commitment. So again, thank you for attending the Fairwork Philippines virtual report launch. This has been your host, Chana Garcia, and we all wish you a great day ahead.
Talaga na.
Again, thank you everyone for joining our launch. You may now exit the webinar. Thank you.